Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Mental illness, depression, suicidal behavior. These are just some of the dangers of using marijuana. Yet the federal government is considering a move that will make the drug even more accessible.
The DEA's plan will also give an economic boost to businesses that sell marijuana. CBN News medical reporter Lori Johnson explains.
In early December, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency will hear testimony on whether the federal government should reclassify marijuana as a Schedule III drug with moderate to low potential for dependency. Schedule I drugs include heroin, ecstasy, LSD, and currently marijuana. A downgrade to Schedule III would put it alongside of anabolic steroids, ketamine, and Tylenol with codeine. One notable impact would be the enormous financial benefit to the $30 billion marijuana industry. That's because the 15,000 dispensaries in states where pot is legal would then be allowed to deduct major business expenses from their federal taxes, allowing them to use that windfall to expand their reach.
They're selling addiction to make money, and they don't give a damn about the public.
David Evans will testify against the move at the DEA hearing by suggesting the government is ignoring pot's dangers.
In the case of marijuana, the FDA is not going to have to study it at all.
Evans will point to today's high THC concentration in the drug and its well-documented link to psychosis.
We're now seeing a lot of that. It causes mental illness, depression, suicidal behavior.
One example is Zach Plant, who was diagnosed with cannabis-induced psychosis after his marijuana use caused him to lose touch with reality while experiencing hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia.
I had thoughts of other people wanting to hurt me, thoughts of the only way of, being safe was to end my own life.
While his symptoms didn't last, doctors gave Zach a warning.
If you smoke marijuana again, there's a chance that you don't come out of psychosis.
Zach's not alone. Doctors regularly see the dark side of marijuana use.
As it became legal, definitely saw more delirium, hallucinations, paranoia as being side effects of this. And then even just normal depression, anxiety.
Also severe vomiting, heart and lung complications, sexual dysfunction, and stomach paralysis.
They would come in and have long bouts of being unable to eat. This would last for 3 or 4 days, and it was well known that it was due to marijuana.
Armed with these and similar stories, David Evans and others will object to the DEA's plan, which would loosen economic restrictions on those who sell it.
It's a political, financial move to cater to the marijuana industry and to young people.
The reclassification process will take months to complete. It's unclear whether the incoming Trump administration will call for a shift in DEA priorities, which could put the move on hold. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Let's take a little lesson in history, and you go back to the shamans, and all cultures seem to have them in the ancient world, and we've had archaeological evidence that the shamans were quite familiar with marijuana. They would have satchels of that. When you look at the Hindu religion and what the gurus are doing, they're smoking ganja, and they're doing it to try to get some kind of revelation. But in that historical account, you look at Homer and the Odyssey, and Odysseus gets trapped in the land of the lotus eaters. And it's a bad place for him. It's not a good place. It's a place where you have drug-induced hallucinations. And so within the Greek civilization, that was condemned. And it sort of went away from this other sort of let's have everybody do it. The Bible talks about this, and this may be a surprise to you, but let's just look at the book of Revelation. And one of the ends of the mystery Babylon, that city that corrupts the whole earth, one of the consequences of their actions is they get thrown down. And here it is in Revelation 18, verse 23. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall not be heard in you anymore. So there's a great darkness. There's no longer any marriage, any thought of family. Your merchants were the great men of the earth, and so there was great trade and great wealth, but all of it got squandered. And here's the reason. For by your sorcery, all the nations were deceived. Now, you read that in English, and you're thinking some kind of, well, it's some kind of idolatry or it's some kind of witchcraft. Well, the underlying word for that is pharmakia. That's the Greek word behind sorcery. And so it ties it back to these shamans who would use trance-inducing, spellbinding drugs in order to have influence over people. So what's going to happen to America when we become under the spell of a drug, where we're constantly looking for the next high? When I was growing up, it was called the counterculture. These days, has it become our culture? And if it has, are we prepared for the end result? Or are we going to be a nation where the light no longer shines, where there's no more joy in marriage, there's no more bridegroom, and there's no more bride? Are we heading to destruction? I think the pathway is quite clear, and let's sound the alarm that this isn't a way forward. You look back again in history, what happened in China when the opium trade was enforced by 3 opium wars, and Great Britain and her allies ganging up on China to keep the opium markets open. It's an horrific history. China calls it their lost century, that because so many people became drug addicted, they weren't able to advance as a culture. Let's wake up to the history. Let's wake up to what we're getting ready to do to ourselves. And let's just look at the English word for marijuana. There's a reason we call it dope. In other news, the House Ethics Committee will not release its report on alleged misconduct by the president-elect's nominee for Attorney General. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. The committee's Republican chairman said the members could not come to an agreement on making the report public. Allegations of sexual misconduct when he was a congressman threatened former Representative Matt Gaetz's confirmation as the country's top law enforcement officer. The nominee met with Republican senators on Capitol Hill Wednesday.
The senator's been giving me a lot of good advice. I'm looking forward to a hearing. Folks have been very supportive. They've been saying we're going to get a fair process.
While moderate Republicans have expressed concerns over his nomination, Senator Lindsey Graham is promising a fair hearing, saying, quote, no rubber stamps and no lynch mob. Well, the Justice Department is targeting cybercrime, recently announcing a new initiative at disrupting online criminals. Cybercrime is expected to cost a staggering $10.5 trillion worldwide. Experts say these criminals are getting smarter and faster by using artificial intelligence. CBN's Brody Carter tells us more.
I've gotten plenty of text messages, phone calls, emails that I'm quite certain, there were scams behind them.
Even members of the Federal Trade Commission are targeted by scammers they're trying to fight. Will Maxon of the agency's Marketing Practices Division says these criminals fool potential victims by using AI to perfect and renew age-old scams.
Where you can have extremely accurate voice cloning done very quickly. The video cloning has become better and better and more seamless and harder to spot really every day, the speed at which they can do it.
According to the FTC, consumers reported losing more than $10 billion to fraud in 2023, up 14% from the year prior. AI makes it easier to deceive by eliminating spelling errors, creating better fake logos or images, while also providing sensitive information like partial social security numbers to make scams appear more authentic.
We've gone from millions to billions to trillions in a decade.
And that's per day.
Per day.
And seniors are clearly targets, with a majority of those seeking help being over the age of 60, reportedly losing a total of nearly $2 billion.
My name is Phyllis Weisberg. I'm a 90-year-old widow. I was the victim of an online scam. The scammers managed to get into my checking account. They removed $20,000.
Weisberg says the experience left her feeling shaken and vulnerable.
My first reaction was total embarrassment that I would do anything that stupid. And all I can do is warn other people and just hope that this will help one person.
Cybersecurity expert James Lee adds that AI is now helping scammers close the traditional age gap.
Today, the target is 25 to 45. They're actually targeted more frequently, and the attack is more successful.
Lee advises taking extra steps to protect against all potential scams. For example, if you get an email or a call from a supposed trusted source, it's essential you take the time to verify it came from that organization.
They do the exact same thing that a normal business does. They target their customers. They figure out, well, this zip code has a higher income level. So therefore, if I target people in that zip code, I have a higher likelihood of getting away with more money.
With artificial intelligence expanding at a breakneck pace, scams will only become more prevalent. While there's no guaranteed way to prevent these attacks, experts maintain that taking protective measures and being vigilant could keep your information and your wallet safe. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Some important tips there. Thank you, Brody. Well, turning overseas, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former defense minister, and Hamas officials. The warrants turn Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant into internationally wanted suspects. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports.
The warrants accuse Netanyahu and Gallant of war crimes and crimes against humanity over the war in Gaza, and Hamas for the October 7th attacks that triggered Israel's offensive. The ICC decision would put Netanyahu and Gallant at risk of arrest if they traveled to certain countries. Back in May, when the ICC threatened arrest warrants, Netanyahu called it a moral outrage of historic proportions. The warrants come as Israel fights wars on its southern border with Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. On Wednesday, U.S. negotiator Amos Hochstein concluded talks with Lebanon's Speaker of the Parliament.
If we made progress, I would go to Israel and make those additional discussions there based on the conversations here and see what we can do.
A major sticking point is Hezbollah's demand that Israel can't respond to violations by the terror group.
It is not allowed for Israel to violate and kill and enter whenever it wants.
Israel's new foreign minister says they must have that right.
We will need to keep the freedom of to act if there will be violations.
Sa'ar says Israel must be able to keep Hezbollah from ever again becoming a huge threat.
We will have to enforce that they won't be able to build again their force in Lebanon. They won't be able to bring again ammunition, missiles.
While Hochstein would not discuss details of the agreement, Middle East analyst Lee Smith tells CBN News it would underwrite the Lebanese army that's been infiltrated by Hezbollah.
We're talking about an additional $400 million for the Lebanese armed forces, in addition to the hundreds of millions that we have now decided to give them yearly. What we're doing is we're paying a Hezbollah asset.
Smith says the deal favors Hezbollah.
It not only protects an Iranian proxy, the chief Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, what it also does is it also it stiffs the American taxpayer. We call it funding for Lebanon. It's not funding for Lebanon. It's funding for Hezbollah.
At the UN Wednesday, the U.S. vetoed a Security Council resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support an unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages.
Israel points out Hamas can easily end the war.
If Hamas were to release the hostages and surrender their weapons, not one more shot would need to be fired.
In the U.S. Senate, an effort by progressives to end sales of offensive weapons to Israel went down to a solid defeat. Opponents said it would send the wrong signal.
This signal will be seen by the enemies of Israel and the enemies of peace as if they just stick with it, they will win.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, back over to you.
The truth has been turned on its head here, and it is just amazing to me. Again, the history Go back to 2006 when Israel withdrew from Gaza. It was under the Bush administration with the promise that somehow or other there'd be an Arab Spring in Gaza. They would realize the benefits of democracy. They would want freedom. They would want prosperity. Well, it turned out they didn't want any of that, and they elected Hamas to lead them. In the very next year, Hamas suspended elections after killing the rival party, Fatah. They took him to the rooftop and threw him over. So you look at this and go, why in the world would the United States ever try to back that? Hezbollah, it's a proxy of Iran. It's fully funded from Iran. All the weapons come from Iran. You look at this, again, in the history, Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon with a promise from the UN that there would be a buffer zone, that no rockets, no weapons, no soldiers would be allowed, and the UN security forces would enforce it. Well, we've seen the video. There are tunnels set up right underneath the watchtower of the UN barracks. It's amazing, the disconnect. And then the International Court to issue arrest warrants. Well, who's the supreme judge of that court? Well, he's a Muslim from Lebanon. Who's the chief prosecutor of that court? Well, he's a Muslim. He's from Britain. His father's from Pakistan. Well, what in the world do you expect to happen? Now, let me call out our own State Department. When you restored funding to Gaza and you restored funding to UNRWA, did you really not know they were supporting Hamas? Did you really not know that the tunnels were right next to the UNRWA headquarters, that the tunnels were right next to the mosques and the schools and the hospitals, that the rockets were right in the building where UNRWA was? Did you not know that? For the funding that's currently going to supposedly the armed forces of Lebanon, do you not know it's being diverted to Hezbollah? Are you exercising willful ignorance in trying to kick the can down the road in some useless hope for peace? I submit to everyone, we're on the verge of a great victory. The proxies in this terror war are about to be defeated. Let's make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure Israel has the weapons it needs, the resolve it needs, the international support it needs in order to finish the job. Because if they can finish the job, then we really can see peace in the Middle East. Well, churches are struggling to meet the needs of parents whose children identify as transgender. That's why a pastor in Northern Virginia opened his church doors to a support group to help them. CBN's Jenna Browder brings us the story.
My question is, how do you plan on addressing the transgender issue in women's sports?
It's an issue almost no one really discussed 5 years ago. Redefined the term women, but today is impossible to ignore.
LGBTQ issues have become a major issue this election cycle, particularly transgender rights.
The transgender crisis affecting an estimated 1.6 million Americans. The issue now so common, pastors are weighing in.
Culture doesn't set the tone for truth here, that the Word of God sets the tone.
Marty Baker is the senior pastor at Burke Community Church in Northern Virginia.
As gender ideology began to surface in 2017, 2018, began to be infiltrated into the school systems, taught to children, that type of thing, well, by definition, you started having parents wondering, what is this?
He chose to focus on the issue in his doctoral dissertation and consistently teaches on it from the pulpit.
We've taught them a lot about the information of it, or the apologetics of it, how to defend, how to push truth as opposed to error, those types of things. So they're very educated on that. But what do you do with all of the life stories? And there's lots of those.
The life stories. Pastor Baker says those life stories came up during a church women's retreat. More than 100 women had questions and needed wisdom.
And I think a lot of churches 5 years ago weren't talking about this, but it's the last 5 years has seen such an acceleration. I think it's time for churches to be teaching more on the topic.
Ed Stetzer is the dean at Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. He says Christians need to speak on this issue in a biblical way that's filled with grace. He sees a big opportunity for the church here.
So I think this is an opportunity for the Church of Jesus Christ to actually put forth a beautiful image of sexuality and gender that actually I think will call to people who are living in a confused and we're all in a broken world, but just unsure about those things. Well, let's say here the Bible gives us a path. We want to walk with you on that path.
Church member Dr. Susan Ashton Lazaro deals directly with teens on this path as a pediatrician.
I will say that thankfully, the number of children presenting with gender dysphoria has decreased in the past couple of years, which is truly encouraging.
On a recent plane trip, Dr. Ashton Lazaro says she saw God's hand at work when she happened to sit next to the head of the Christian Post and the issue of transgenderism came up.
Once we started talking about that, the CEO, Christopher Chu, he said, oh, we're trying to have an event in Northern Virginia, but we can't find a church that's brave enough to host this event for us. And that's when we started chatting about the fact that I thought our pastor, Pastor Marty, would most likely be interested in hosting an event in conjunction with Christian Post.
And it happened. Dr. Ashton Lazaro and other experts in the field gathered at Burke Community Church in October for a conference. During the event, leaders announced the formation of a new support group, Wonderfully Made, a ministry for parents with children who identify as trans and refuse to bow to the pressure of society to socially and surgically transition them.
The group is for parents whose children are struggling with their identity. And our aim is to walk in prayer and support and grace with these families to help them feel that they're not alone.
Psalm 139, verse 14 talks about God makes you individually. So if God made you, then by definition, he didn't make a mistake. And so there's purposes in how he designs us. That's the essence of the whole thing. God made us, male and female. Genesis 1 says so. So he didn't make a mistake. So how do you handle a system that's telling you it is a mistake?
The group has no pastoral leadership or curriculum. It's simply parents leaning on parents.
It's caring for each other. And that's getting down into the mess of other people's lives, crying with them, being concerned about them. Because a lot of these people feel alone.
Wonderfully Made held its first meeting at the beginning of November. The church tells us 12 people showed up, a mix of those wanting to help launch the group and others needing support. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Now, Paul's words from Ephesians are still relevant today. Let us strive to speak the truth in love. And in that, we come into full maturity of Jesus Christ. Jesus was known as a friend to sinners. He would welcome people. The Pharisees looked at him askance. If you knew the type of woman that is at your feet crying over you, you wouldn't let her touch you. That's what the Pharisees said. And Jesus said, I'm here for her. I'm here to forgive her. And to whom much is forgiven, they love much. So let's do this in love, but we need to continue to speak the truth. We can't become of this world. We need to hold to the standard, and the biblical standard is Jesus. And if we can just introduce people to him, well, he'll take care of whatever identity they have, whatever identity problem. When you find your identity in Christ, that you are to grow up to be like him, well, then wonderful things can happen. So, church, please keep your doors open, but still speak the truth in love. Terry?
Albert Einstein said there are only two ways to live your life. One is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is. Pastor Mark Batterson is definitely someone in the second category because he sees God perform millions of miracles every single day.
Mark Batterson has been the lead pastor of National Community Church in Washington, D.C. for nearly 30 years. The Regent University grad is also a prolific New York Times best-selling author. Known for plumbing the depths of basic Christian beliefs, Mark uncovers God's deeper meaning to draw us closer to Him. In his 25th book, A Million Little Miracles, Mark shows us how to recognize everyday miracles, including, he says, every one of us.
Mark Batterson joins us now via Zoom. And Mark, we welcome you back to the program.
Thank you, Terry. Great to be with you.
You've talked about us needing to have a holy curiosity. What is that, and how do we cultivate it?
Well, I think it's a recognition that all truth is God's truth. Embryology is a branch of theology. Romans 1:20. God's invisible qualities are revealed through what he has made. And it was Einstein who said, never lose a holy curiosity. And I think that's part of the image of God, Terry. It's an appreciation for nature and nature's God.
Talk about some of the everyday miracles that we might miss or take for granted.
Yeah, right now we're on a planet that's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour and speeding through space at 67,000 miles per hour. So, Terry, even on a day where we feel like we didn't get much done, we did travel 1.6 million miles through space. And I don't know anybody who says, God, thanks for keeping us in orbit, or I wasn't sure we would make the full rotation today. We take constants for granted. I think God is so good at what God does that if we aren't careful, we miss the miracles that are hiding in plain sight.
I love this. You and your wife have practiced writing what you call gratitude journals. Talk about what that is and how it's helped you discover the miracles in life.
Well, either we take things for granted or we take them for gratitude. And Terry, my wife, Laura, has gone through 2 bouts with cancer over the last 7 years. And we're on the other side and she's in good health. But you take a lot less for granted after you're fighting for your health. And so I think gratitude is pretty critical. In fact, the psalmist said, we can't even get in the gates without thanksgiving, which is a good reminder as we walk into a Thanksgiving and Christmas season.
Absolutely. And when you're going through those hard places, like you talked about with health or other things, it can impact the outcome of all of that, can't it?
It really can. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And if we're looking for something to complain about, we'll always find it. If we're looking for something to be grateful for, we'll always find it. It's amazing the Israelites, as they were in the wilderness, this moment when they complained about manna. Last time I checked, manna was a miracle. God was door dashing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so they're complaining about a miracle. And so, Terry, life can become a chore and a bore if we fail to recognize those everyday miracles. And I believe in the miracles that defy science, that defy a doctor's diagnosis. I've experienced those kinds of miracles, but I would argue that, hey, 37 sextillion biochemical reactions happening in the human body right now. I didn't flip a switch or change the batteries. If that's not miraculous, I'm not sure what is.
And one of the things about the Israelites that always has hit me is how quickly they went from petitioning to suddenly not being grateful anymore. You point to the vastness of the universe as an example of God's majesty, and whew, it really is. But some scientists say that the opposite is true, that it shows there's no God. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think we recognize intelligent design when we see it. And I'm a little weary of being made to feel foolish for believing in intelligent design when it's common sense and common science. And so I think part of what I try to do in the book is really help us substantiate our faith. Glenn Scribner said, Christians believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. Atheists believe in the virgin birth of the universe. Choose your miracle. And so I want to state for the record, you are not a cosmic accident. You are not the result of random chance. You are the image of God, the apple of God's eye. You're God's workmanship. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. You were made a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory. And this is a cultural moment where we've got to recapture that theology of dignity and praise the God who gave us that unique fingerprint, voice print, and eye print.
I love the fact that, well, you talk about joy a lot, but you also use the term playfulness. Talk about the value of that as an everyday miracle.
Well, Psalm 104 says that God made the Leviathan which is some kind of sea creature, to frolic, to sport, to play. And I think as a parent, like parents love watching their kids play instruments or play sports. There's a playfulness that we've got to recapture in our relationship with God. And there might be those who would say, well, that doesn't sound that important. Jesus said, unless we become like little children, we can't even enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think this playfulness is a part of the nature of God. He is not a cosmic killjoy. In fact, newsflash, God is in a good mood. This is the God who loves us, cares for us, and bigger than big, closer than close, but gooder than good. And that's the God that we need to rediscover.
You talk about the vastness of the universe in your book with some amazing numbers and statistics, but you also talk about God working miracles on a personal level, completely different aspect.
Yes. God doesn't exist within the 4 dimensions of space-time he created. In fact, when God said, let there be light, those 4 words are still creating galaxies at the outer edge of the universe. So, Terry, God is bigger than big, but that begs the question, is he closer than close? Well, good news. He's not just transcendent. He's imminent. This is an ever-present help in time of need, a friend who sticks closer than a brother, a God who will never leave us nor forsake us. And so I hope everyone hears this. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He collects your tears in his bottle. They're that precious to him. And scripture says that your name is tattooed on the palm of his hand. So we are seen, heard, and loved by God. And I think that's something that then begins to transform the way that we relate to the almighty creator of the heavens and the earth.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes to the goodness of God, you use an odd example, the story of Joseph Merrick, who many of us have come to know as the Elephant Man. What do we learn from that story?
Well, I think what we learned, he rediscovered the beauty of God in nature. And it's a longer story than I can probably do justice to, Terry, but again, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And so here's the great danger. In the beginning, God created us in his image. We've been creating God in our image ever since. And so if we aren't careful, we begin to project our history, our personality onto God, where I would argue what we need to rediscover is this God who is gooder than good. Before original sin, original blessing. This is God's most ancient instinct. It's his heart towards us. And Joseph Merrick discovered that, and it transformed his life.
And we need to not define him by our limitations, but by his majesty, which is remarkable. You can discover everyday blessings by getting Mark's brand new book. It's a wonderful Christmas gift this time of year, can I say. It's called A Million Little Miracles, and it is available nationwide. Mark, thank you so much. It's always great to have you on. You always encourage us. The Lord bless.
Thanks, Terry. God bless.
You too.
Welcome back to Washington for this CBN News break. The Venezuelan man convicted of killing Georgia nursing student Laken Riley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. An Athens County judge convicted Jose Ibarra of 10 counts, including malice murder. Ibarra chose not to have a trial by jury. The case sparked national outrage over illegal immigration during the election. Ibarra entered the United States illegally 2 years ago and was allowed to stay while pursuing his immigration case. Pardon me, he's convicted of murdering the 22-year-old nursing student as she was out jogging. Well, President Biden's Health and Human Services Secretary was back in the hot seat over the administration's handling of the border. Wednesday, House Republicans questioned Javier Becerra about unaccompanied minors who entered the United States illegally. Republicans accused the Office of Refugee Resettlement of losing track of roughly 150,000 children, leaving them vulnerable to gangs and drug traffickers. Becerra said his department worked tirelessly to raise up a network of trained and licensed caregivers to help the young children. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.
His home was in chaos, filled with drinking, domestic violence. So Charlie prayed, God, defeat the devil that gripped my parents. Just like he saw God defeat the devil in an episode in Superbook, it happened in his family.
8-year-old Charlie said his parents always seemed to be fighting and didn't seem to care about their kids.
Our household was often in chaos. Frequently, I would argue with my wife. All I thought about was having fun, drinking, and being happy.
When we got drunk, we would not care for our children. Domestic violence was a common thing for us.
One day, a neighbor invited Charlie to a Sunday school in Indonesia where they live. There, he watched a Superbook episode by CBN Animation called The Final Battle. It was the first time he'd ever watched a Bible cartoon.
In that story, I learned that God defeated all demons.
At the end of the episode, Charlie prayed with his teacher to become a Christian. He said the final battle also triggered him to pray for his parents.
I wanted God to defeat the devil that gripped my parents.
Just 2 weeks later, Charlie's mom, Lenny, went to church.
The first time I went to church, I was trembling like someone who was scared. I was afraid I might faint. The sermon seemed to pierce my heart. That day I cried.
Lenny said the Lord has truly transformed her heart.
Jesus is changing everything.
Charlie continued to pray, and 2 weeks after that, his dad came to church.
On Saturday night, I decided that I would go to church the next day. I didn't tell my son because I was a little afraid. So that night, I secretly prepared my shoes and clothes.
Charlie's parents now attend church every week and also prayed to become Christians. And the change in his family has been dramatic.
Now my parents no longer fight and they no longer drink. Through Superbook, my family and I came to know Jesus. Thank you and God bless you.
Superbook is transforming lives around the world. When you see the impact of the stories of the Bible, and one of the things that was a principle of every Superbook episode, when Bible characters are talking, they're talking verses from the Bible. When we translate it, we find the most popular version of the Bible in that language, and that's what we use. The Word of God is powerful, and it never returns void. It always accomplishes these amazing things. So it wasn't just Charlie, it was his family, and it taught him how to engage in spiritual warfare. Lord, help me. The enemy has control of my parents. Help me. And it's wonderful. God answered his prayer. Well, Superbook is reaching children worldwide in over 60 languages, and we're on our way. We want every single broadcast language around the world, and you can help support this mission of spreading the gospel by calling us 1-800-700-7000. Just say, I want to give to Superbook. Now, when you do, and for a gift of any dollar amount, we have a special Superbook Christmas devotional available for you this holiday season. I always have a test of how good things are. When my co-hosts say, I want this, I'm going to take this home and share it with my children. Ashley wants to share it with her nephews and her niece. And it's a wonderful book. It's packed with scriptures, fun activities for people for all ages. And again, it's yours for a gift of any dollar amount. So if you want to see the gospel go around the world, if you want to see the children of the world know the stories of the Bible, call us, 1-800-700-7000, or go to cbn.com/superbookchristmas.
November is National Adoption Month, and we want to share with you the story of a couple who risked their lives to save 2 orphans from death. Sarah and Tony Whitbrod were told by the government, don't fly to Ukraine. They ignored the warning because 2 special needs children needed their help. Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022. As the world braces for a Russian invasion into Ukraine, Tony and Sarah Whitbrod board a flight headed to the port city of Odessa.
The government knew that we had plans to be in Ukraine and had sent us an email that said, do not travel. We are evacuating all Americans out of Ukraine. If you choose to go to Ukraine, you're flying on your own. No one will come and get you.
The couple had a compelling reason for ignoring the dire warnings. Lives were at stake. 2 Ukrainian children, both with special needs, were waiting for Tony and Sarah to adopt them. 3 of the couple's 6 children at home in Douglas, Wyoming, had also been adopted.
From the second that we pursued them, they were my children, and they were my responsibility, the same as any of my other children. And so to choose not to get them would be like losing your children, and that wasn't an option.
The moment you say yes during that process and you see a child and you see that face and you're like, no matter what, like we're bringing that kid home and that kid's gonna live here forever.
The couple made it to Odessa, and the next day took custody of the children. 1-year-old Caius, a boy who needed surgery for a condition affecting his joints, and 2-year-old Junie, who was born with a rare genetic disorder and desperately needed a bone marrow transplant. They were scheduled to fly to Poland the next day, Tuesday the 24th. That morning at 3 a.m., those plans would change.
Like the loudest boom, like, I can't even describe it unless it's just the loudest boom, and then everything just kind of, the air, the walls, everything just shakes, and you just, like, it takes your breath away.
Yeah, Russia had invaded. It was real. We get an email on our phone that says your flights have been canceled, find other means of transportation. And then right with that, the State Department saying, where are you? We need to know your location. If you move, like, what's going on? Tell us your plan.
By then, all Ukrainian airports had been shut down, and the Whitbrods needed a new plan to save themselves and the children.
I thought, next step, what do we do now? We knew what their future held. We knew that if they didn't get out, that was it. There was nothing for them there.
The couple prayed, contacting friends stateside to pray as well. The closest and safest airport was in Bucharest, Romania, 400 miles and 2 countries away. So with the help of their interpreters, they crossed into the country of Moldova on Ukraine's western border. From there, they drove all day and night, racing along dirt roads. Finally, they reached Bucharest. But by now, their funds were depleted, and airline tickets had quadrupled in price.
Just the exhaustion has really kicked in, and that nervousness of like, man, if anything goes wrong, like, we're not leaving these kids, but we got to get home to our other 6 kids. And just going forward, like, blindly through that faith in that, like, next step, whatever we can do, whatever we're allowed to do, we're going to do the next step, and we'll get going.
Within a day, supporters from the United States had come through, and Tony and Sarah had enough money to purchase the last 2 seats on a plane to Warsaw.
But like, you literally felt the power of prayer from across an ocean in the middle of a war when everything was just chaos and unknown. There's a picture that I have of Sarah. She's holding Caius when we landed in Poland after like a flight that we shouldn't have been on, like how it all worked out like that at the last minute and with everything being so chaotic. But the most hardest part for me is a picture of my wife looking more tired than I've ever seen her look in her life, like clutching our baby in this blanket, and just looked like, that was the hardest part.
A week later, they were back home where Caius and Junie were welcomed with loving arms.
I had a faith that if I'm supposed to go there, then the way will be made for me to get there. And so that's kind of the faith that I was traveling on.
Ever since then, Caius and Junie have lived a life surrounded by a family who loves them, even though both continue to have medical needs. And they're still looking for a bone marrow donor for Junie. Sarah and Tony have never questioned their decision.
When you are called to something, you really want to show up because really amazing stuff happens.
To someone who was considering adoption but thought it might cost too much or it might be too hard or too difficult, it'll change your life. Yeah, our life is so much richer and so much grander and so much more amazing because we said yes.
When God invites you to live something that's bigger than you could ever imagine, you show up because it's going to be awesome. And it is. It has been every time.
More than an opportunity, a privilege. What an amazing couple, and how wonderful that God directed their steps through what could have been really quite disastrous to bring them back to be able to parent all those special kids. How wonderful. God bless them. Time for some email questions.
They're a couple after your own heart.
Yeah, they are. She said, the minute we started pursuing them, they were my children. I love that. Gordon, this is Tricia who emailed and said, I thought a few days ago on the 700 Club question answer part of the program, Gordon mentioned that a person did not have to tithe on Social Security income. So how does that apply for pension, IRA, Roth IRA, or 401k?
Tricia, if you've got all the above, you have an abundance. But
yes.
Anyway, the tithe is on the increase. So look at Social Security. You pay into Social Security. It's deducted from your check every single paycheck. And you've paid into that over your lifetime. Social Security actually keeps track of your payments. There's another payment that the employer matches as part of it. But you can actually know how much you paid in. So in calculating the increase, how much have you paid in? And when that's exhausted and anything over and above that, you can call an increase. And if you want to tithe on it, feel free. In the realms of IRAs and Roths and 401ks, you can calculate how much you've put in every single year. I encourage people to always use the maximum. And so you can then pretty easily, if you've been using the maximum, you can pretty easily calculate how much did I put in. And then you can also calculate your interest. If it's in one of these brokerage accounts, they'll give you how much was the increase over whatever period of time you want to calculate. So as you withdraw from that, you can tithe on the increase, but you don't have to tithe on what you put in because it wasn't an increase. I hope this makes sense. Pensions get you into a whole nother world, and it has to do, is it a defined contribution, defined benefit? Some of the defined benefit ones, I would consider all of that to be an increase, but you've got to get it into the guts of it. How much did you put in? And then what's the increase over that? Tithe is on the increase. Here's a word from Psalms. The earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. God bless you. We'll see you again tomorrow.